In 1945, one of the most powerful rigid-frame locomotives ever built rolled out of Altoona. Within a few years, the whole class was being pushed out of service. By the mid-1950s, none of them were left in one piece. Nobody stepped in to save one. This is the story of the Pennsylvania Railroad Q2. The Q2 was a problem in metal, about 7,987 horsepower at the Altoona test plant, a record number for steam. The Pennsylvania Railroad even claimed it could pull 125 freight cars at 50 miles per hour. Single-handedly, no helper engines, no double heading, one engine doing a two-engine job. The Pennsylvania Railroad had built the hardest-hitting non-articulated steam locomotive they ever threw at the rails. And here is the ugly part. It worked. Crews said it steamed beautifully. It rode like a Pullman. It burned coal efficiently and rarely struggled to build pressure. The Q2 could move more tonnage than most locomotives on the Pennsylvania Railroad roster. When it ran well, it ran very well. Firemen actually liked working on them. But that is where the trouble really started. The Q2 was a duplex. That means it had two separate sets of driving wheels, each powered by its own pair of cylinders, all mounted on one rigid frame. The idea was simple: split the power, hit the rails less violently, and keep it moving fast. Union Pacific went the opposite direction with the big boy. Same era, same ambition, same goal of moving impossible tonnage across American steel. Very different outcome. Big Boy was articulated. Its front engine could pivot independently from the boiler. That flexibility meant better grip through curves, better weight distribution across uneven track, and it was far less likely to start slipping the moment you opened the throttle. Crews called it sure-footed. One engineer described running it as the hand of God pushing you down the rails. That's not poetry. That's how it felt. A lot of big boys racked up insane mileage before they were finally retired. 8 of them survive today. 1 still runs. The Q2 had no such flexibility. Rigid frame, 2 engine sets fighting for traction on the same chassis. And when one set lost grip, the trouble started. Pennsylvania Railroad knew wheel slip was a problem with duplexes. They had seen it on the T1 passenger engines. Violent slipping not just at starting but at speed. The kind of slipping that could damage valve gear components and leave an engineer wrestling with a machine that no longer responded the way it should. So for the Q2, they installed an automatic slip control system. Butterfly valves in the steam lines would cut power to a slipping engine set and restore it once traction returned. Good idea. In reality, a mess. That system wasn't reliable. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And when it failed, crews had one option. They had to bring the entire train to a near stop before they could get moving again. Not slow down, not ease off. Nearly stop with 100 loaded freight cars behind them at speed. That is not a minor inconvenience. That is a breakdown of trust between man and machine. Once it slipped, you were done. You couldn't finesse your way out of it. You just had to stop and start over. Later accounts say maintenance crews did not always prioritize servicing the slip control system during overhauls. It was complex, buried in the machinery, and as diesel power became the focus, fewer crews wanted to deal with it. The thing that was supposed to save you often failed to do its job, and everyone who ran it knew that. And then there was the water. The Q2 drank water. Push it hard, and you were right back at a water stop. That does not sound catastrophic until you realize what it meant in practice: constant anxiety about making the next water tower. Some crews reported struggling to reach them at all. The tender held about 19,000 gallons. Sounds like plenty. The Q2 could drain it quickly under hard running. Every run became a calculation. Can we make it? Will the pressure hold? Is there enough left if something goes wrong? The big boy carried roughly 25,000 gallons, but more importantly, Big Boy did not burn through it at the same desperate rate. And Big Boy's articulated frame meant smoother operation, less wasted energy fighting itself, and less fuel and water consumed doing the same work. The Q2 had power, tremendous power, But power you cannot trust is worse than power you do not have. This is where it gets almost tragic. The Q2 was designed as a high-speed freight locomotive. Pennsylvania Railroad, known as PRR, literally called it high-speed freight in internal documents. The engineers at Altoona built it to haul tonnage at 60 or 70 miles per hour. That is where all that horsepower advantage over the J1, the simpler freight engines PRR already trusted, would finally show. At high speed, the Q2 was supposed to leave everything else behind. But PRR ran freight at 50 miles per hour, period. At that point, you might as well fold up your high-speed design. At 50 miles per hour, the Q2's advantage over the J1 largely disappeared. Same tonnage, same speed, same arrival times, but the Q2 cost significantly more to maintain. It had twice as many cylinders to inspect. It required specialized care that shop crews were not trained for and increasingly did not want to provide. The shops at Columbus could turn around a J1 quickly and cheaply. The Q2 took longer, cost more, and tied up resources. They built a monster for a race that was never allowed to start. All that power, engineered for a service that PRR never actually ran. Later reports describe a boiler-cracking mess that sidelined the class fast. The Pennsylvania Railroad had to scramble, shuffling J1 class locomotives out to Fort Wayne to cover the routes. They borrowed power from wherever they could find it. Some accounts describe it as happening almost at the same time. That is the gist. The Q2 fleet never recovered. By 1955, every single one had been sold for scrap. No museum wanted one. No railroad preserved one. No historical society stepped in to save even a single example of the most powerful rigid-frame locomotive ever built. Zero survived. From what shows up in the usual records, what is left is mostly plates, nothing complete. That's it. That's all that remains of a locomotive that once pushed the limits of steam power. Big Boy, by contrast, retired as a legend. Crews loved them. 8 survive in museums across America. One, number 4014, was restored to full operation in 2019 and still runs excursion tours across the country. When it passes through towns, crowds line up for miles. You hear the whistle first, then you feel the ground start to shake, then you see it. One engineer said you can feel that whistle reverberate in your chest. Nobody lines up for the Q2. There is nothing left to line up for. The Q2 was not a bad locomotive. It was a mismatched one. Too much power for a system that could not use it. Too complex for shops that could not maintain it. Too rigid for a job that required flexibility. And when the one system designed to keep it under control failed, as crews frequently reported, they were left with a machine they could not trust. They loved what it could do. They just could not count on it doing it. Big Boy felt heavy, solid, predictable. The Q2 felt nervous. Same era, same steel, same coal, completely different confidence level in the cab. Big Boy had limits. The Q2 did not. And that is exactly what destroyed it. Would you rather have less power you can trust or more power you cannot? Pennsylvania Railroad answered that question in 1952. They just did not realize they were answering it until the whole fleet was already cold. Maybe it was the strongest on paper, and exactly because of that, it was impossible to sustain.